Hey agripreneurs, welcome once again to the Panuka YouTube channel. Today we're looking at a very juicy topic related to what you can actually see in the background. That's banana galore. Since we posted a video around banana farming 101 a couple of days ago, I think one of the topical questions that we've actually seen image is, what does it take to actually grow bananas from a cost perspective, in terms of just starting a banana plantation. So that's been one of the topical questions that we've received, and yeah, we're here to benevolently articulate what it would actually take to start a banana farming enterprise. Of course, the greatest factor to that is how big, what's the scale at which you actually want to do banana. But one thing I can actually indicate is that banana farming is far from doing other crops like maize farming. So you cannot equate an acre or a hectare of doing maize farming to banana. As such, in the quest to manage expectations, I know a lot of people would actually say, no, I just want to start with, say, 4 hectares or 5 hectares of bananas. I'm like, hang on, do you even understand what it actually takes to do just 1 hectare of banana? So as such, to manage those expectations and then just to bring reality in the costing, we're doing this video to make sure that there's clarity of mind so that you really manage your expectations. So first things first, when you're actually doing a costing model, we always start with what is called assumptions. Why do we start with assumptions? Because the reality on the ground, depending on where you are in your own context, some of the parameters that we'll actually talk about here might actually not apply. As such, you are actually at liberty to plug in the numbers that resonate with your context. But we'll try and just outline, exactly what it takes in terms of the cost to actually start, a banana, farming enterprise. But some of the things might actually not apply to you, and as such, you can skip that, but then pick up what really applies to your own, context. So there's quite a number of assumptions that we'll actually use in here. And in the cost, you actually note that we're using much more of Zambian kwacha because that's where we are. But then we'll try by all means to translate that into USD as a common, currency. At present, $1 is equivalent to around 27 kwacha. So that's the exchange rate that we'll actually use in our calculations. But depending on the time that you actually watch this video, this context might actually have shifted. So you actually need to redo your numbers. So that cleared, let's actually now get into the details of what it takes in terms of costs to start a banana farming enterprise. So the first thing that you actually require to start a banana farming enterprise is land. So one of my expertise is actually what is called project finance. That's part of the Master of Philosophy in Development Finance that I did some time ago. And in project finance, we say there's no project without a place. And as such, you can't have a banana plantation without a place, and that is land. So you actually need land for you to actually start, this banana, farming enterprise. But like I said, we are working with just 1 hectare in this video. So yeah, you actually need that 1 hectare for you to do, banana, farming. But we're actually not going to put a price or a cost to land, given that there's quite a number of permutations. You probably already have that 1 hectare, or you can actually lease it, or probably it's actually family land. But the only thing that I must actually emphasize here, much as I'm not going to put a cost to land per hectare, is that banana farming is long term. As such, make sure that you've got long-term rights to use that land. Otherwise, it will actually be a wasted, investment. If at all, there's some element of contestation on the rights to use, that land. So that's the first thing. If you're leasing, you plug in leasing costs will actually be per month, per year. If it's buying, in your own context, plug in what it would actually take for you to buy that 1 hectare of land. But then if you already have it, then we move on to the next aspect related to land. Cost number 2, after the issue of land purchase, is the issue of fencing. Now, most of the people underrate the issue of fencing, the land where they're actually going to do, production. But if you're actually looking at farming as a business, you need to make sure that you actually manage operational and production related, risks. What you don't want is that you've got such a beautiful, plantation as what you can see behind, and then some animals come and start, grazing in here, So you want to make sure that your land is actually well fenced, so that you actually manage some of the risks related to encroaching, especially by wild animals or even domestic animals such as goats, or cattle. So make sure that you actually factor in the cost of fencing. You don't go about planting something like this. It costs quite a lot of money, and then you just leave it in the open. That's a huge risk. Again, what you do is that go to your local supply of fencing material. Again, this moves around in terms of the costs, but it also depends on what kind of fencing you're looking at. There's barbed wire for animals. You can also look at box wire, and then you can also use those Y posts. But then now there's been quite a lot of theft on those Y standard poles. So probably you can actually go for the concrete fencing material. So that is the other cost that you actually have to incur. So you buy land, next fence it, so that we manage operational and production related risks. The third component is around water. Now this is a very critical aspect, given that these plants in the background here, the bananas, are heavy guzzlers of water. They actually require quite a lot of water. As such, if you've got land, before you actually go crazy with demarcations, preparing the land, make sure that you are certain that you've got adequate water. And as such, you actually need to make sure that you survey and go ahead and actually drill a borehole. And we recommend that you actually do a commercial borehole. So issues around depth is actually determined by the amount of water the experts will advise. But from a Zambian perspective, a commercial borehole that we've actually done practically ourselves, drilling alone will actually cost you around 100,000 kwacha. That includes the drilling plus also casing from top to bottom. Related to that water needs to actually get into the fields, and as such you actually need to put some power mechanism. Ourselves, we are 100% off grid, so a solar system on a commercial borehole, operating around maybe 5 horsepower, will actually be around 100,000 as well, kwacha. So you take that into account in terms of the water systems. But if you already have a borehole, like we said, we're actually working with assumptions here. That cost will actually not be incurred. But just make sure that you've got adequate water, and preferably go for a commercial borehole, and make sure that you've got the right power system to really drive water into the fields. If you're actually using other different irrigation systems, sprinklers, that's another option that people use, or you're actually using drip or any other irrigation. Generally, I think you need some very good power to drive the water, making sure that your irrigation, which we'll talk about later, is actually done properly. So that is another set of costs that you're actually bound to incur. Drilling the borehole, around 100,000 kwacha, and of course putting together, say, a solar system, if you're off grid, another 100,000. So you're talking about 200,000 kwacha just for those two costs. So the fourth component of your costs relates to land clearing. And when we actually talk about land clearing, there's different components to this. Given that land clearing is not always a one-step job, especially if you are dealing with forested or an even terrain. So let's just now look at how you'd actually approach this. So the first assumption is that you've got forested land that requires just some basic clearing. Um, and then if you're looking at just forested land, which is exactly the situation that we had ourselves, you actually have to look at tree removal, the root excavation, the basic brush clearing on the land. So that's part of the cost that you actually have to incur. And based on the cost that we actually incurred ourselves for a hectare, this would actually be estimated around 25,000 kwacha per hectare, which is close to just 1,000 US dollars. But at the exchange rate that I talked about $925 per hectare. So our advice is that you need to negotiate a fixed output based rate, not a daily rate, to manage costs. So if it's output based, once you actually agree that here's a hectare, clear this, and then I'll give you so much once this is actually completely done. So the second part of land clearing, is the issue of flattening the land of uneven terrain. So in our case, we also had an issue here where we had quite a lot of ant hills. We needed to actually flatten the place so that the place is actually quite even, even for laying the irrigation systems. That will probably require about 2 days, depending again on how uneven the place really is. And in Zambian kwacha, most of these yellow machines, as we call them, the JCB, would cost you roughly about 6,000 kwacha per day. And if you require to do that for 2 days, that would be around 12,000, quite equivalent to almost 445 US dollars. We also had a unique situation. We actually went ahead to flatten the land, but then at some point we actually realized when it was raining that the drainage system was actually not proper. Quite a lot of rainwater was actually going through the field and then sweeping away all the different nutrients in the fields. And as such, we actually needed to create some trenches, which actually served two purposes. One is passage for water, but second is also passage for the irrigation pipes. So again, to do that, you require these yellow machines, the JCBs. Our assumption is that it probably take you 2 days, 6,000 kwacha per day, and that would cost you roughly about 12,000 kwacha for doing that. So moving ahead now to cost number 5, and this relates to now the field design, spacing, and issue of plant population per hectare. Now this obviously drives different kinds of costs. So let's dive in and look at what the details are in relation to this cost component. So this actually depends on the variety of banana. For the dwarf varieties, such as the dwarf Cavendish, there's different recommended spacing of say 2.5 by 3 meters. That will actually give you about 1,333 plants if you go with that. There's also medium varieties. If you do 3 meter by 4 meter, about 833 plants per hectare. And then the tall varieties, like say 4 meter by 4 meter, about 25 plants per hectare. But let's now go through some of the preferred spacing for plants, so that we look at how we're actually going to plan the digging of the planting stations. So in our case, we actually went with 3 meter by 1.5 meter, which is our preferred spacing, and that's what you can actually see right behind me here. Now with this, it actually means that your area per plant is actually 4.5 square meters, which is 3 meters by 1.5. Now with that, remember we are working with 1 hectare, and the dimensions of 1 hectare is 10,000 square meters on assumption of 100 meters by 100 meters. So with that, it actually means that the plant population, if you actually adopt 3 meter by 1.5, is 2,222 plants per hectare, which is 10,000 square meters divided by 4.5 square meters. Remember, the 4.5 square meters came from the spacing of 3 meter by 1.5. So if you are actually going for suckers, it actually means that at an average cost of about 35 kwacha, per plant, and then you're dealing with that kind of plant population of 2,222 at 35 kwacha. So that means that your total cost will be about 77,770, which is equivalent to about $2,880 at the exchange rate that I earlier, provided. That is if you're actually going with suckers for this 1 hectare. But if you're going to go for tissue culture, which is what we actually did, the average cost right now is about 50 kwacha, per plant. So at that rate, it means for 1 hectare, you're actually looking at 111,100 kwacha, roughly about 4,101.5, just to actually get your tissue culture, seedlings. So that's the cost that you actually incur. But what we've also seen is that there's a different regime of plant spacing that's quite common, and this is where you have 2 meter by 2 meter, rows, and after that set of 2 meter by 2 meter, you have a space of 4 meters in between. So that is actually also quite common. Earlier on, I also forgot to actually talk about the whole preparation, because other than just buying the seedlings, one other cost that you actually incur is actually to dig the planting stations. And if you're bringing in casual labor, in our case, I think we were paying roughly about 5 kwacha per hole. So in the area 3 meter by 1.5, which gives us 2,222, the cost was actually coming to about 11,110, which is 2,222 times 5 kwacha. So that is equivalent to around 412 US dollars. So depending on the country where you are, you can actually recalculate that. So you can actually look at different planting stations and recalculate the total population so that you see how much it will actually cost you to dig the holes. Like I said, the assumption we're using is around 5 kwacha per hole. And then you also look at just buying either the suckers or the tissue culture seedlings. So in the other video, banana farming 101, which you can actually find on our YouTube channel, check for the link below. You actually note that we did discuss the pros and cons of using tissue culture versus suckers. The next cost is the issue of manure at planting stage. Much as there's some synthetic fertilizer that you can actually mix with manure, but manure remains the goat in terms of nutrition when you actually talk about bananas and indeed any other fruit trees. But again, we will not put a cost to that because there's quite a lot of permutations and assumptions that we can actually look at when it comes to manure. And one of them is the fact that you probably already have some cow dung or pig dung or any other form of manure that you can actually use, or you're actually sourcing it elsewhere. So again, the price there might actually differ depending on your circumstances, but that's something that you actually need to invest quite a bit in, given that you require that quite extensively at planting stage. So irrigation is the next cost that we're looking at, and this is a big one because, like I earlier said, plants are actually, guzzlers, these bananas that you see, and as such, you actually need to make sure that you set up the right irrigation, systems, and there's quite a lot of, options that you can adopt. Others use, drip, irrigation. Guess it works. But check out the pros and cons if you are using, drippers. But then you can also look at using microjet, sprinklers. This is exactly the setup that we have here on the farm. And so what you can actually do is that you just go to a supplier and indicate to them the plant population and, of course, the spacing that you are adopting so that they calculate for you exactly the kind of materials that you require. And as such, given obviously the noise in the pricing and what you actually require, it wouldn't make sense for us to put a figure to that. But if you're actually going for the kind of irrigation setup that we have on the microjet, sprinklers, there's quite a number of other different pieces that you require, and would probably include issues like valves, swivels, and make sure that they've got the right radius. In our case, we actually went with the ones that can give us a 3-meter radius. You also need spreaders. By the way, these spreaders, it also depends whether you're looking at orange or black or any other color, depending on exactly what you are going to irrigate. Right here on the farm, you actually note that the ones that we use in banana are actually different from what we use in papaya or oranges. So yeah, when you actually look at the irrigation setup, in our case, at any given time, we can actually irrigate about 500 plants on one end. But given that we've got 2 systems running at the same time, we're actually able to irrigate about 1,000 plants at any given time. But in one field, split into 500 plants, and in the other field 500 plants. So again, that depends on the efficacy of your irrigation system, and so you actually use the valve system to control how you do the irrigation. And again, this is one part we actually indicated that when you're starting, make sure that you bring in the right tried and tested water engineers to help you set this thing up. We're lucky that over time we've actually mastered this in-house, so we actually get to design this in-house. So again, that goes to why you actually need to invest a lot in capacity building of your staff, so that over time these costs get eliminated and they're actually brought in inwards. That's kind of backward integration through capacity building. So as earlier indicated, we were just looking at the cost of starting. This is not a profitability analysis. I know someone will come in the inbox like, oh, is it profitable? We're just looking at how much it actually costs you to start, and we've actually used quite a number of assumptions. There's other costs that we probably haven't talked about, but what we have done is actually to pick some of the salient features of the different costs, so that actually gives you the nomenclature of costs that you actually are bound to incur in starting a banana farming enterprise. And probably let's just look at the summary of what we talked about. So we looked at borehole setup, and I think we estimated that about 100,000, which is equivalent to roughly $3,700. Solar pumping system, another 100,000 kwacha, roughly about $3,700 Then we talked about land clearing. If you're just doing basic clearing, roughly about 25,000 kwacha, close to about $1,000. And then if you're doing land clearing, which is full land clearing, where you also have to even out the place, if there are any ant hills, we're looking at about 49 to 50,000 kwacha, roughly about $2,000 or thereabout. And then we're also looking at the preparation of the planting stations, digging the holes, roughly about 11,110, which is equivalent to roughly $412 dollars. And then if you're using suckers at about 35 kwacha, on average, that gives you roughly about 77,770 to actually buy suckers for just 1 hectare. But like I earlier indicated, this is dependent on the plant spacing and the number of plants per hectare, because that is actually driven from the spacing that you adopt. But that gives you an average, figure to work with. And then you're also looking at, if you go the tissue culture route at an average cost of say 50 kwacha per tissue culture seedling, that roughly gives you about 111,100 kwacha, roughly about 4,115 US dollars. Then we move on to look at irrigation system, roughly about 60,000 per hectare, depending on what you adopt. That might actually shift around. And then you're also looking at the high end in terms of irrigation systems. That would roughly be about 100,000. So it's either the 60,000 or 100,000, depending on what you choose. So that's like the minimum and maximum, figures that we've put here. And then you're also looking at fencing the land, and we estimated between 25 to about 50,000, kwacha. So those are the figures that we're working with. Now, when you actually put all this together, you actually realize that banana farming is not in the same league as maize farming or any of the other stuff that you probably have farmed, given that the startup costs are actually quite onerous and very, very high. So when you go about saying, oh, I'm going to start banana farming with, say, 10 hectares, I hope now it's actually bringing the message home that, yeah, tone down. Probably you actually need to start with 1 acre, move to 2 acres, and then graduate to probably a hectare, and not immediately talking about 5 to 10 hectare as a small, holder or emerging, farmer. Because based on what we've actually articulated here, you actually note that the total estimates, if you're using suckers with some basic, clearing and low irrigation, you're already looking at about 398, thousand, close to 400, which is almost 15,000 US dollars. But if you're actually looking at starting with, full clearing and some high irrigation, material, when I talk about full clearing, remember you're starting from a forested, land. You need to flatten that and then do the planting station. You're looking at 472,000, almost equivalent to about 17,515 US dollars. But you actually note that if you use now tissue culture, the costs are even higher, but then you get compensated on the quality of the plantation. But you note that you're working with a minimum, figure of around 432,000, which is roughly about 15,990 US dollars. And then on the higher end, you're looking at 506,210. And on the higher end, it's actually giving you roughly about 18,744 or 45 thereabout in terms of the cost, per hectare. So remember, these are based on assumptions. I know someone will come and crucify me. It's cheaper, it's more expensive and stuff like that. This just gives you a bit of an idea of how much to be prepared with a plus minus of 10 or 20%, maybe, with the cost that I gave you. But like I said, I actually used the assumptions that played out in our case to put together, this, banana plantation that you see right behind us. So as we wrap up, hope this has actually given you an idea of how much it actually costs to just do 1 hectare of bananas, and I hope it's already helping you to manage expectations and whether you are actually willing to join in this boxing ring, yeah, and in terms of just also the scale at which to actually start banana, farming. But this is the kind of stuff that we deal with in our course on accounting and financial management, which you can find on the Panuka AgriBiz hub, which is our learning app. And they say in agribusiness you can't manage what you can't measure, and as such, what we've actually given you are snippets of us measuring what it actually costs to start a farming enterprise of a banana plantation for 1 hectare. And that makes you approach this from a very sensible and sober perspective, full preparation. And if you're actually looking at seeking a loan or any other financing, modalities or products, you actually find when you actually do your financial, forecasting in terms of the finance needs, it actually gives you that clarity. Because sometimes we raise money and we realize either the money is too much or even too little, because we actually didn't understand exactly what it takes to start a certain, farming enterprise. And if you're actually looking at banana, we have just given you a leakage so that it actually provides some certainty around investing in bananas. So we actually strongly implore you to invest in that, course that we have on the Panuka AgriBiz Hub, which is called Accounting and Financial Management. And we practically run through how you actually set up your data collection, and also, analysis of the different costs, and of course, revenue and everything else. So it's a total solution in terms of financial literacy for agripreneurs, and we go all the way to look at the financial statements. And I can actually promise you that we've actually demystified lots of technical jargon in finance. Remember, I am actually a chartered accountant originally, SCCA, a fellow of SCCA, and of course a fellow of the Zambia Institute of Chartered Accountants. So that's my forte, that's my turf, and yeah. So you're actually getting the best of both worlds: seasoned agripreneur, and of course a trained accountant, really offloading quite a lot of juicy nuggets around accounting and financial management. Really curated for you, the agripreneur. So guys, this has been yours truly, Bruno Mwemba, the chartered accountant, the farmer. Yeah, and I'll see you in the next one. And I really hope you enjoyed this. And please subscribe, share with others. Don't be stingy with knowledge. We've brought this knowledge for free. So yeah, share it freely. Until next time, bye-bye.